Claire Hartley felt the wall press into her back before she understood why she had backed into it. Nathan Pierce stood close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath. One arm braced against the wall beside her head, boxing her in without ever touching her. Behind him, the engagement party rolled on, soft string lights and clinking glasses, as if nothing in the room had changed. To Claire, everything had. "You look good," Nathan said. "Better than when you left me." "Nathan, move." "We're not finished talking. We finished 18 months ago." His jaw tightened in a way she used to mistake for passion, and now recognized as something closer to a warning. He leaned in, and her stomach folded into itself, a cold drop behind her ribs. She scanned the crowd over his shoulder, looking for her cousin Sophie, for anyone, and found only strangers in good suits laughing at jokes she could not hear. That was when she saw him. A man near the bar, dark suit, unbothered posture, the kind of stillness that made the people around him look like they were vibrating. She did not know him. She did not care. She needed a stranger, and he was the only one close enough to reach in time. Claire ducked under Nathan's arm before he could react, crossed the floor in 4 fast steps, and took the stranger's hand like she had done it 100 times before. "Play along," she whispered. "Please." The man looked down at their joined hands, then at her face, then past her shoulder to where Nathan had already turned to follow. Whatever he saw there, he did not ask about it. "Okay," he said simply, and slid his arm around her waist like it belonged there. Nathan stopped a few feet away, his expression shifting from annoyance to something Claire had not expected. Not jealousy, not anger. His eyes had gone wide, and his face had lost color, the way a man's face drains when he realizes he has wandered somewhere he was warned never to go. "This is Nathan," Claire said, keeping her voice steady. "My ex. Nathan, this is—" She trailed off, realizing she did not have a name to offer. "Gabriel," the stranger said, filling the gap without missing a beat. He extended a hand toward Nathan, easy and unhurried. "Good to meet you." Nathan did not take it. "I didn't realize you were seeing someone," he said to Claire, though his eyes kept sliding back to Gabriel's face like he was trying to place him. "There's a lot you don't realize," Claire said. It should have ended there. Instead, Nathan kept staring at Gabriel, and something passed behind his eyes that looked almost like recognition, and almost like fear. He took a step back, then another. "Right," he said. Sure. I'll let you two get back to it." He was gone before Claire could decide whether to feel relieved or confused. She watched him cut through the crowd toward the exit, not toward the bar for another drink, not toward the dance floor where his friends were standing, but straight for the door, the way a man moves when he wants distance and wants it immediately. Gabriel's arm was still around her waist. Claire became aware of it the way you become aware of your own heartbeat after running, present the whole time, only noticeable once everything else goes quiet. "You can let go now," she said. "Thank you, really. That was more than I expected from a stranger. You looked like you needed it." "I did." She stepped back, putting a few feet of space between them, and tried to find her footing again. Her hands were not steady. She pressed them flat against her dress to hide it. "I'm Claire, by the way, since you already know my ex's entire personality and not my name. Gabriel Lane." He said it plainly, like a man giving a fact rather than an introduction. "And for what it's worth, your ex has worse manners than most men I've met tonight." "You don't know the half of it." "I know enough." Something flickered across his face, gone before she could read it properly. He glanced toward the door Nathan had disappeared through, then back at her. "Has he done that before? Cornered you like that?" Claire hesitated. The honest answer was yes, more than once, in ways that had taught her to scan rooms for exits before she scanned them for friends. But she had just met this man. She was not in the habit of handing her history to strangers, however useful their arms had turned out to be. "He's harmless," she said, "just persistent." Gabriel studied her for a moment, and she had the uncomfortable sense that he did not believe her, not because he doubted her honesty, but because he recognized a lie that protected the speaker more than it deceived the listener. "If you say so," he said, and let it go. A waiter passed with a tray of drinks, and Claire took one without thinking, holding it more for the steadiness of having something in her hand than for any interest in drinking it. Her pulse had not yet returned to its normal rhythm. She kept replaying the look on Nathan's face, the way color had drained out of it the instant he had gotten a proper look at Gabriel. "Can I ask you something strange?" she said. "You already took my hand and called me your boyfriend in front of a room full of people I've never met. I think Strange is already on the table. A short laugh escaped her, surprising her with how easily it came. Fair. Okay. Did you see his face when he looked at you? I saw it. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Gabriel's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more like the shadow of one. Maybe he just has good instincts. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got tonight. Claire wanted to push further, but the night had already given her enough strangeness to chew on, and Gabriel Lane did not look like a man who explained himself simply because someone asked. She decided to let it sit, the way you let a hot pan rest on the counter rather than touch it before you know it has cooled. The party moved around them, indifferent to the small drama that had just played out near the bar. Sophie found Claire a few minutes later, flushed and glowing in her engagement dress, and pulled her into a hug that smelled like champagne and relief. "Did I see Nathan leave?" Sophie asked, eyes wide. "Please tell me you didn't let him ruin tonight." "I didn't," Claire said, and glanced over Sophie's shoulder to where Gabriel stood a polite distance away, watching the exchange with the patient stillness of a man used to waiting. "Someone helped me out." Sophie followed her gaze, and her eyebrows climbed toward her hairline. "Who is that?" "Long story. Make it a short one. He's gorgeous." Claire did not have an answer that would not sound ridiculous out loud. "I grabbed a stranger and asked him to pretend to date me, and now my ex looks like he saw the end of the world." She settled for a shrug and let Sophie pull her back into the party, throwing one last glance at Gabriel before she went. He was still watching her, unhurried, like a man with nowhere else he needed to be, and all the time in the world to figure out exactly what he had just walked into. It was nearly an hour later, after Sophie's fiancé had given his toast, and the dance floor had filled with people who had each had one drink too many to care how they looked, that Claire found herself near the coat check, suddenly aware of how tired she was, how the earlier rush had burned off and left her hollow underneath it. She fumbled for her ticket and did not notice Gabriel until he was standing beside her, holding a coat that was not his own. "You left this earlier," he said, holding out her jacket, "when you made your great escape across the room." "I didn't leave it. I forgot I had it because I was busy commandeering a stranger. Effective strategy, for what it's worth." She took the coat, their fingers brushing for half a second longer than the exchange required, and neither of them moved to make it shorter. Up close, in the low light near the door, she could see things she had missed from across the room. The faint white line of an old scar near his jaw, the watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her monthly rent, the way his eyes tracked the room even while he talked to her, cataloging exits and faces, like a habit too old to break. "Can I ask you to do me one more favor?" she said, because the night had already cost her enough strangeness that one more request seemed harmless. "Walk me to my car. Sophie's driving home with Daniel, and I don't really want to cross that parking lot alone after tonight." Of course, he did not ask why, did not make her explain the lingering edge of fear that Nathan had left behind like a smell that would not air out. He simply fell into step beside her, matching her pace as they moved through the lobby and out into the cold. The parking lot was nearly empty, pools of orange light scattered across the asphalt, her car a dark shape near the back. Claire felt the tension in her shoulders ease with every step, not because the threat was gone, but because the man beside her moved like someone who had never once in his life needed to look over his shoulder. At her car, she turned to face him, suddenly unsure how a night like this was supposed to end. "Thank you, for all of it. The fake boyfriend thing, the coat, the walk. I don't usually ambush strangers at parties. I don't usually let myself get ambushed." A faint smile, there and gone. "Makes me wonder what it was about tonight. Maybe you just have a soft spot for women and over their heads. Maybe." He reached into his jacket and produced a small white card, plain, except for a string of numbers printed across the center. No name, no company, nothing else. "If he bothers you again, or if you just want to know why he looked at me like that." Claire took the card, turning it over once like it might reveal more on the back. It did not. Mysterious. "I like it. Good night, Claire." "Good night, Gabriel." She watched him walk back toward the building, hands in his pockets, unhurried, until a black car pulled around from somewhere out of sight, and a driver stepped out to open the door for him, before he had even reached the curb. Claire sat in her own car for a long moment after he had gone, the card resting on the passenger seat, the engine running but the gear still in park. She thought about Nathan's face, the color draining out of it, the way he had practically run. She thought about the silent driver who had appeared exactly when needed, like he had been watching the whole time. She thought, mostly, about how strange it was that out of every person in that crowded room, instinct had pulled her hand toward the one man who made an ex-boyfriend look afraid for his life. Then she put the car in drive and went home, telling herself it was nothing. She did not, that night, throw the card away. The card sat on Claire's kitchen counter for 4 days, propped against the fruit bowl like a small white flag she had not decided whether to raise or surrender. She walked past it every morning making coffee, every evening unloading takeout containers, and every time her eyes caught the edge of it, she felt the same flicker of curiosity she had felt watching the color drain from Nathan's face. She did not call. She told herself it was because calling a stranger from a party was the kind of thing that ended badly in the stories Lily Marsh liked to send her at midnight, links to articles with headlines like the date that changed everything for the worse. Lily worked 2 desks away from Claire at the small publishing house where they both spent their days untangling manuscripts that authors swore were finished and never were. Lily had opinions about everything, and on Monday morning, she had opinions about the party. "You're telling me," Lily said, perched on the edge of Claire's desk with her coffee cooling in her hand, "that a strange, devastatingly put-together man pretended to be your boyfriend, scared off Nathan so badly he looked like he'd seen his own ghost, and you have not called him. It wasn't that dramatic. You used the word ghost. You don't get to also use the word dramatic like it doesn't apply to you." Claire kept her eyes on her monitor, scrolling through a manuscript she was not actually reading. It was a party favor. People do favors at parties. It doesn't mean anything. Sure. And I'm sure the card he gave you with his private number on it doesn't mean anything either. Lily reached over and tapped the corner of Claire's desk, where, embarrassingly, the white card had migrated sometime over the weekend, tucked half under her keyboard like she had carried it to work without quite admitting to herself why. "Claire, call the man. What if it's weird? It's already weird. You can only make it less weird by finding out what it actually is." Claire turned the card over in her fingers that night, sitting cross-legged on her couch with a glass of wine she had poured, and then mostly ignored. She thought about the way Nathan's voice had gone thin near the end, the way he had backed away like the floor had tilted under him. She thought about Gabriel's stillness, the kind that did not come from confidence alone but from something underneath it, something she could not name and was not sure she wanted to. She typed the message 4 times before sending it. "This is Claire. From the engagement party. I still owe you a coat retrieval favor and possibly an explanation." The reply came faster than she expected. "No explanation needed, but I'll take the coffee that usually comes with an apology you don't actually owe me." She laughed out loud in her empty apartment, a short, surprised sound, and felt something in her chest unclench that she had not realized was still wound tight. They met 3 days later, at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from Claire's office. The kind of place with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu that changed its handwriting style depending on which barista was working. Claire arrived first and chose a table near the window, telling herself it was so she could watch for him, knowing it was really so she would have somewhere to look that was not directly at the door, in case he did not come. He came. Gabriel walked in wearing a gray sweater instead of a suit, and the change did something strange to Claire's sense of him, made him look less like a man from a story and more like a man who occasionally got cold. He ordered black coffee, no sugar, and sat across from her like he had been doing it for years instead of minutes. "You look different out of a suit," she said. "I clean up well either direction." Confident. Accurate. He wrapped both hands around his cup, and for a moment, the stillness she remembered from the party seemed to crack slightly at the edges, replaced by something almost like nerves, though she was not sure a man like him got nervous. "How's your ex?" "Gone as far as I can tell. He hasn't called, hasn't texted. It's been the quietest 4 days I've had in over a year." "Good. You keep saying things like that. Short. Final. Like you're closing a door every time you talk about him." Gabriel's gaze flicked toward the window, toward the street outside where people moved past in the kind of unremarkable hurry that made up most of a city's daylight hours. "Some doors are better closed." "That's not an answer either. You're going to find I give a lot of those." Claire reached for the sugar packet she did not need and tore the corner open just to give her hands something to do, a habit she had carried since childhood, the same compulsion that had her organizing pens on her desk by color whenever a deadline made her chest go tight. A few grains of sugar scattered across the table, and she swept them into a neat little pile with the side of her hand, focusing on the small white grains instead of the question pressing behind her teeth. Okay, she said. New approach. Tell me something true. Doesn't have to be about Nathan. Just something true about you. Gabriel considered this for a long moment, long enough that Claire wondered if she had pushed too hard for a first coffee. Then he said, I don't sleep well in quiet rooms. Grew up somewhere loud. Quiet makes me feel like I'm missing something. That's oddly specific for a man who gives short final answers. You asked for true. I gave you true. Okay, my turn. I alphabetize my spice rack, and I have never once needed to find anything faster because of it. I just like knowing where things are. That tracks, he said, and there it was again, the almost smile, a little less guarded this time. You strike me as someone who needs to know where things are. Is that a problem? No, I think it might be the opposite. They talked for an hour that turned into 2, about nothing important and everything that mattered. The kind of conversation that maps a person's edges without ever asking them to hand over the whole shape at once. Claire learned that Gabriel had a sister he rarely mentioned, and clearly loved fiercely when he did. She learned he hated modern art and loved old jazz records, that he had strong opinions about the correct way to make coffee, and weaker ones about almost everything else. She did not learn what he did for a living, and she noticed, somewhere around the second hour, that she had stopped trying to find out. When they finally stood to leave, the late afternoon light slanting gold through the window, Gabriel held the door for her and said, Dinner, Saturday, somewhere that isn't a coffee shop with mismatched chairs. Is that a question? Would you prefer it be one? I'd prefer you ask instead of inform. He inclined his head, conceding the point with something close to amusement. Claire Hartley, would you have dinner with me on Saturday? I would. Saturday arrived with a kind of nervous energy Claire had not expected to feel, the sort she associated with much younger versions of herself, the kind who used to spend an hour deciding on an outfit for a movie date in high school. She told herself this was different, that she was a grown woman who had been on dinners before, and then she changed her dress twice anyway. The restaurant Gabriel chose was small and unmarked from the street, tucked behind an unassuming door that gave no hint of what waited inside. The moment they walked in, an older man in an apron came around the host stand so fast he nearly knocked over a water glass, greeting Gabriel by name, with a warmth that bordered on reverence, ushering them to a corner table, without anyone checking a reservation list. Regular customer? Claire asked once they were seated, watching the owner retreat with visible relief, as though a held breath had finally been released. Something like that. He looked at you like you were visiting royalty. He's a generous man, exaggerates things. Claire let it go, the way she had let several small strange things go over the past 2 weeks, filing them somewhere in the back of her mind under a heading she had not yet been brave enough to write out fully. Dinner arrived in courses she had not ordered, dishes the kitchen seemed to produce on instinct rather than instruction, and through all of it, Gabriel kept the conversation easy, funny in a dry, understated way that made her laugh more than she expected to. Halfway through the meal, his phone buzzed against the table, and he glanced at the screen with an expression that closed over like a door swinging shut. Excuse me, one moment. He stepped outside, visible through the window as a dark shape pacing a small circle on the sidewalk. Phone pressed to his ear, his free hand cutting short, controlled gestures through the air. Claire watched him for longer than she meant to, noting the shift in his posture, the way his shoulders had gone rigid in a manner that had nothing to do with cold weather. When he came back, he was smiling again, smooth and easy, like the call had never happened. Sorry about that. Everything okay? Just business. What kind of business keeps a man pacing outside a restaurant on a Saturday night? The kind that doesn't care what day it is. He reached for his water glass, and Claire noticed his hand was steadier than his voice had been a moment before, a small detail she filed away with the rest. Tell me about your father. You mentioned him once at the coffee shop and then changed the subject so fast I nearly got whiplash. It was Claire's turn to feel a door swing shut somewhere behind her ribs. Not much to tell. He died when I was young, left some debts nobody talked about, and a daughter who learned to be careful early. She said it lightly, like a fact recited from a textbook rather than a wound still tender underneath the scar tissue, and Gabriel did not push, did not ask the obvious follow-up question hovering in the space between them. He simply nodded, like a man who recognized the shape of a story he was not being told the whole of, and let the silence do the rest of the work. Careful early, he repeated quietly. I know that particular education. Something passed between them then, unspoken and immediate. Two people who had each learned young that the ground under their feet was not always as solid as it looked. Claire reached for her wine, more to break the moment than to drink, and the conversation drifted back toward safer ground, toward jazz records and spice racks, and the absurd amount of opinions Gabriel had about the correct way to fold a fitted sheet. They walked afterward, the night cool enough to justify Gabriel offering his jacket, which Claire accepted without protest. The streets near the restaurant were quiet, the kind of quiet that made footsteps sound louder than they were, and somewhere around the third block, their hands found each other, without either of them quite deciding to make it happen. "Can I ask you something?" Claire said, "and have you actually answer instead of giving me one of your short final doors? You can ask. What do you do? For work, really?" Gabriel was quiet for several steps, long enough that Claire thought she had finally hit the wall she had been circling since the coffee shop. When he spoke, his voice had dropped into something more careful, more deliberate. "I run a family business," he said. "It's old, it's complicated, and it's not something I talk about on a second date. Not because I'm hiding it, but because I'd rather you know me a while before you know what I do." That sounds like a warning. Maybe it is. Maybe I'd rather give you the chance to decide about me before you decide about my name. Claire turned this over in her mind, walking beside him under streetlights that buzzed faintly overhead, and found, to her own surprise, that she was willing to accept it. Whatever waited behind that careful, deliberate sentence, she was not ready to walk away from the easy laughter, the dry humor, the way his hand had wrapped around hers like it had always belonged there. "Okay," she said, "I'll take the deal. For now." "For now," he agreed, and squeezed her hand once before letting it go, the gesture saying more than the words had managed all evening. Over the next 2 weeks, what had started as a strange favor at an engagement party folded itself into something steadier, something with shape and rhythm. There were movie nights where Gabriel fell asleep halfway through and woke insisting he had seen the whole thing. There were walks through the park near Claire's apartment, where he named every dog they passed before its owner could, apparently a private game he refused to explain the rules of. There was a quiet Tuesday evening when he showed up at her door with soup because she had mentioned, almost in passing, that she had a cold, and she stood in her doorway holding the container long after he had gone, struck by how unfamiliar it felt to be taken care of without being asked first. She still did not know what he did. She had stopped, mostly, letting herself wonder. It was a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the party, when the wondering came roaring back with a force she could not ignore. Claire was at her desk, scrolling through emails, when Lily dropped into the chair across from her, with the particular energy of someone who had just learned something they were dying to share. "So," Lily said, "Mystery Man, you've mentioned him like 4 times this week. What's his name? You've been weirdly cagey about it." Claire hesitated only for a second, then decided there was no real reason to keep hiding it from her closest friend. Gabriel Lane. The change on Lily's face was immediate and total. The teasing brightness drained out of her expression like someone had pulled a plug, replaced by something that looked, for just a moment, like real concern. "Lane," Lily repeated slowly. "As in, the Lane family? I don't know what that means." "Claire." Lily glanced around the office, lowered her voice even though no one else was within earshot. "My brother used to work freight down near the Harbor District. He talked about the Lane name like it was something you didn't say too loud in certain bars. I thought it was just one of his exaggerated work stories. I didn't think—" She trailed off, shaking her head slowly. "I need you to tell me everything, right now, starting with how you met him." Claire felt the floor of the afternoon tilt slightly under her, the same way it had felt the night Nathan's face had drained of color in front of a man she had known for exactly 4 minutes. Every small strange detail she had been quietly setting aside over the past 3 weeks rearranged itself in her mind: the restaurant owner's near reverence, the careful pacing phone call, the words, "I'd rather you know me before you know my name." "I think," Claire said slowly, "I already know more than I've let myself admit." "Then you need to talk to him," Lily said, "today, before this gets any deeper than it already is." That evening, Claire sat across from Gabriel at a small table near his apartment, having barely touched the food he had ordered. The lighting was low, intimate, exactly the kind of atmosphere built for a different conversation than the one she had come to have. "Tell me," she said, "everything. No more careful doors." Gabriel set down his fork, met her eyes without flinching, and for the first time since the engagement party, the easy charm fell away entirely, leaving something older and more tired underneath it. "All right," he said, "then let's talk." The words hung there, heavy and unfinished, while outside the window, the city kept moving, indifferent to the quiet weight settling over the table between them. "My family doesn't run a normal business," Gabriel said. "We never have. My grandfather built something on the docks 2 generations ago that the law would call organized crime, and the neighborhood called survival. I inherited it the way other men inherit a name and a house. I didn't choose it. I won't pretend I haven't made it mine since." Claire's hands had gone still in her lap, the nervous fidgeting that usually accompanied hard conversations strangely absent, replaced by a kind of focused stillness she did not recognize in herself. "What does that mean? Practically, what do you actually do?" "I make sure people who owe debts pay them. I make sure people who threaten what's mine learn not to." His voice stayed level, almost gentle, the tone of a man explaining something unpleasant, because he respected her too much to soften it into something it was not. "I don't pretend it's clean. I won't sit here and tell you it's a victimless thing, because it isn't. Not always. But I also don't go looking for trouble that doesn't come looking for me first. And Nathan, that night. Why did he look at you like that?" Gabriel's jaw tightened, the first crack of real anger Claire had seen in him since they had met. "Your ex owes money, not to me directly, but to people who answer to me." He recognized my face from somewhere he shouldn't have been standing close enough to see it. That's all I'll say about him tonight. The restaurant noise seemed to fall away around them, narrowing the world down to the small table and the candle guttering between them. Claire thought of the deferential restaurant owner, the silent driver who appeared exactly on cue, the careful phone call paced out on a cold sidewalk, every strange piece slotted into place with a quiet, terrible click, like a puzzle finishing itself whether or not she wanted the picture it made. "My father owed people money once," she heard herself say, the sentence arriving before she had decided to let it out. "When I was 12, men came to our house. I don't talk about it." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. Something in Gabriel's face shifted, recognition passing over it like a cloud crossing the sun, and he did not ask her to explain further, did not reach across the table to comfort her with words that would only make the moment larger than it needed to be. He simply sat with it, the way she had sat with his confession a moment before, 2 people holding pieces of the same kind of damage without forcing the other to unpack it on command. "I'm not your father's debt collectors," Gabriel said quietly. "I need you to know that. Whatever happened to your family, I had no part of it." "I know that. Logically, I know that." Claire pressed her palms flat against the table, grounding herself against the wood the way she used to ground herself against kitchen counters as a child, listening through closed doors for voices that meant the night was about to go wrong. But knowing it and feeling it are different things. I spent my whole childhood learning to read a room for danger before I could read for anything else, and now I'm sitting across from a man who is, by his own description, the kind of danger I learned to read. I would never let anything happen to you. You don't get to promise that. Nobody in your world gets to promise that, do they? Gabriel did not answer immediately, and his silence told her more than any words could have. The candle between them burned lower, wax pooling at its base, and somewhere in the kitchen, a dish clattered against a counter, ordinary sounds from an ordinary evening that no longer felt ordinary at all. "I need space," Claire said finally. "Not forever. Just space. I need to figure out if I can hold both things in my hands at once. The man who brought me soup when I had a cold, and the man who just told me he makes sure people learn not to threaten what's his. They're the same man, Claire." "I know. That's exactly the problem." She stood, gathering her coat from the back of the chair, and Gabriel made no move to stop her, no grand gesture, no desperate plea, only a quiet nod that cost him something to give. At the door, she paused, looking back at him sitting alone at the small table, candlelight carving shadows into a face that had looked so easy and unguarded just an hour before. "Thank you for telling me the truth," she said, "even though I asked for it knowing it might break something. Anytime you want to talk, the number still works." She walked out into the cool evening alone, her own choice this time, no one walking beside her to make the parking lot feel smaller than it was. The city moved around her the way it always did, indifferent, ongoing, and Claire let herself cry exactly 4 blocks before she straightened her shoulders and finished the walk to her car with dry eyes. She did not go straight home. Her hands were still unsteady on the wheel by the time she reached Lily's building, and she sat in the car outside for a full minute, debating whether showing up unannounced at 9 at night made her pathetic or simply human. She decided she did not particularly care which. Lily opened the door in pajama pants and an old college sweatshirt, took one look at Claire's face, and stepped back without asking a single question, waving her inside toward a couch that smelled faintly of the lavender candle Lily lit whenever her own week had gone sideways. "Tell me everything," Lily said, settling cross-legged at the opposite end of the couch with 2 mugs of tea she had clearly made on instinct, the moment she saw the look on Claire's face. "Start with what he said." Claire told her, the words coming easier now that the worst of the shock had worn into something closer to grief, the careful confession at the candlelit table, the part about debts paid and men who learned lessons, the small devastating mention of her own father that had slipped out before she had decided to share it. "He didn't deny any of it," Claire said. "He didn't even try to make it sound smaller than it was. He just told me, plainly, like he'd rather I hate the truth than love a lie. That's either deeply honorable or deeply terrifying. Maybe both. I keep trying to decide which one matters more." Claire wrapped both hands around her mug, the warmth of it grounding her the way the hot kettle handle had grounded her earlier, a small physical anchor against the larger storm in her chest. "I told him I needed space. He didn't argue. He just let me walk out, like he already expected it, like he'd had this conversation in his head 100 times before I ever asked the question out loud. Do you regret asking? I don't know yet. That's the honest answer. I don't regret knowing the truth. I think I'd have regretted not knowing it a lot more, eventually, when it was too late to walk away cleanly." Claire stared into her tea, watching the steam curl and vanish. "I just didn't expect the truth to come wrapped around something that also explained why I felt so safe standing next to him in a dark parking lot. Both things are true at once, the danger and the safety. I don't know what to do with that yet." Lily reached over and squeezed her knee, no easy answer offered, no attempt to smooth the moment into something simpler than it was. "Then don't do anything with it tonight. Drink your tea. Stay on my couch if you don't want to be alone. Figure out the rest of it tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever your chest stops feeling like it's in a vice." Claire stayed until well past midnight, the conversation drifting eventually into quieter, easier territory. Old stories from college, complaints about a manuscript neither of them could fix no matter how many red pen marks they made. The kind of ordinary friendship that asked nothing of her, except to exist in it for a while. When she finally drove home, the night had cooled considerably, and her apartment greeted her with the particular hollow quiet of a place built for 2 voices that had only ever held one. The following days settled into a strange, muted rhythm. Claire went to work, edited manuscripts, ate lunch with Lily, who had the good grace not to say "I told you so," even though the words clearly sat behind her teeth the entire week. She did not call Gabriel, he did not call her, holding to the space she had asked for, with a discipline that somehow made her miss him more, not less. On the 4th night, Claire found the empty soup container still in her recycling bin and stood over it for longer than the moment deserved, turning the plastic lid over in her hands like it might explain something the man himself had refused to explain on his own terms. She threw it away properly this time, pressing it flat into the bin like that would settle the matter, and it did not settle anything at all. Lily watched her pick at a sandwich at lunch on the 6th day, and finally set down her own fork with a small, decisive clatter. "You look like someone took something away from you, and you're trying to convince yourself you didn't want it in the first place. I asked for space. I'm allowed to take the space I asked for." "Sure, you're allowed. Doesn't mean it doesn't show on your face." Claire pushed a piece of lettuce around her plate without eating it. "What would you do if you found out the person you'd started falling for ran the kind of business your brother used to whisper about?" "Honestly, I don't know." Lily considered the question with more seriousness than her usual deflecting humor allowed for. "I know my brother used to say the lane name kept the docks quieter than they used to be, before. Fewer break-ins, fewer disappearances. He used to say it like that was a strange kind of comfort. The devil you know holding the door shut against worse devils you don't. Doesn't make it right. Just makes it complicated." "Complicated," Claire repeated. "That's one word for it." She did not call him. She caught herself reaching for her phone twice that week, thumb hovering over his contact name before she set the phone face down on the counter and walked into another room, as if putting distance between her hand and the device could undo the pull she felt toward it. At night, she lay awake longer than usual, replaying the candlelit table, the careful way he had said, "I would never let anything happen to you," the harder truth underneath it that he could not actually promise such a thing, and had been honest enough not to pretend otherwise. By the 8th day, the muted rhythm had nearly settled into something she could almost call normal again, the ache duller at the edges, manageable in the way a bruise becomes manageable once you learn which side to sleep on. She told herself the worst of it had passed. It was on the 9th day that her phone rang with a number she did not recognize, and against every instinct telling her to let it go to voicemail, she answered. "Claire." Nathan's voice, but wrong, stretched thin and fast, in a way she had never heard from him before, not even in their worst arguments. "Claire, I need you to listen to me. I'm in trouble, real trouble, not the kind I can talk my way out of." "Nathan, why are you calling me?" "Because I don't have anyone else, and because," his voice cracked, an ugly, frightened sound, "because the people I owe money to know about you. They know you're connected to Lane. They think I can get to him through you, and I told them I couldn't, but they don't believe me. And Claire, these aren't people who take no for an answer." Claire's apartment, which had felt steady and safe a moment before, suddenly seemed to tilt at the edges, the walls pressing in with a weight she had not felt since childhood, since nights spent listening through doors for voices that meant the world was about to change shape without warning. "Nathan, what did you do?" "I made a mistake," he said, the words dissolving into something close to a sob. "I made a very bad mistake, and now it's not just mine anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Claire. You need to be careful. Starting now." The line went dead before she could ask another question, and Claire stood frozen in her kitchen, phone still pressed to her ear, listening to a dial tone that suddenly sounded louder than anything else in the room. The kettle on Claire's stove had just started to whistle, and she stood staring at it without moving, the sound rising into something sharp and insistent, while her mind replayed Nathan's cracked voice on a loop. "They know you're connected to Lane. Be careful. Starting now." The kettle screamed louder, and still she did not move, her hand wrapped so tightly around her phone that her knuckles had gone pale, every other thought crowded out by the small, ridiculous detail of steam curling toward the ceiling. She finally crossed the kitchen and yanked the kettle off the burner, the metal handle hot enough to sting, and the small jolt of pain seemed to snap something loose in her chest. Her hands were shaking. She set the kettle down too hard, water sloshing over the rim, and stared at the wet patch spreading across her countertop, like it was the only thing in the room that made sense. She called Gabriel before she had fully decided to. He picked up on the first ring. No greeting, just her name, sharp and immediate. "Claire." "Nathan called me." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, the words tumbling faster than she meant them to. "He's in trouble, real trouble," he said. "The people he owes money to know about us, know I'm connected to you, and they think they can use me to get to you. And Gabriel," he sounded terrified, "and now I'm terrified, and I don't know what to do with my hands." "Where are you right now?" "Home. My kitchen." "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone but me. I'm 15 minutes out." "Gabriel, I asked for space. I don't want you to think this means." "Claire." His voice cut through hers, gentle but absolute. "Space matters. You matter more. Lock the door." The line went dead, and Claire stood in her kitchen listening to the silence where his voice had been, the wet patch on the counter still spreading, the kettle ticking as it cooled. She crossed to the front door on legs that did not feel entirely her own, and turned the deadbolt, then stood with her back against it the way she had once stood against a wall at an engagement party, waiting for a danger she could not yet see the shape of. He arrived in 12 minutes, not 15, and Claire had the door open before he finished knocking, pulling him inside with both hands fisted in the front of his jacket, like she could anchor herself to something solid that way. He did not say anything about the space she had asked for, did not bring up the candlelit table or the careful door he had warned her about weeks ago. He simply held her, one hand spread flat against her back, and let her breathe against his shoulder, until the shaking in her hands settled into something more like stillness. "Tell me everything," he said, Gabriel murmured against her hair. "Every word. Don't leave anything out, even if it seems small." She repeated the call as precisely as she could remember it, and watched his expression shift through something cold and controlled as she spoke, a man filing away facts the way a soldier counts ammunition. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was deciding how much of his own thinking to let her see. Nathan owes money to a man named Victor Dre, Gabriel said finally. Not someone who answers to me. A separate operation, smaller, meaner, the kind that doesn't have the patience or the discipline my family built over 2 generations. If Dre thinks he can use you as leverage, he's not bluffing about the threat. Men like that don't make threats they're not prepared to follow through on. So what do? We don't do anything. I do something. You stay safe. That's not. Claire pulled back enough to look at him properly, frustration cutting through the fear for the first time since the phone call. That's not how this works, Gabriel. You don't get to decide my safety is a problem for you to solve alone while I sit in a corner and wait. I'm not putting you in a corner. I'm putting distance between you and a man who would hurt you to make a point to me. His voice had hardened, the protective edge underneath it sharpening into something almost fierce. I told you once I would never let anything happen to you. I meant it then. I mean it more now. And I told you nobody in your world gets to promise that. Then let me try anyway. The argument hung between them, neither willing to fully yield, until Gabriel exhaled slowly and pressed his forehead briefly against hers, a gesture that cost him something to make, the stillness he wore like armor cracking just enough to show what was underneath. I'm not asking you to disappear, Claire. I'm asking you to let me put people around you who know how to watch a street properly. That's all. You keep your life. You keep your job, your apartment, your independence. I just don't want you walking to your car alone until this is finished. Claire thought of the dark parking lot outside the engagement party. The way Gabriel's presence beside her that night had made the space feel smaller, safer, manageable. She thought of her father, the men who had come to their house when she was 12, the particular helplessness of being a child who could not do anything but listen through a door. She was not 12 anymore, but the fear, apparently, had not entirely outgrown its old shape. Fine, she said, but I want to know what's happening. All of it. No more careful doors. No more careful doors, he agreed. The following days reshaped themselves around a new kind of normal. A car idled outside Claire's apartment most mornings, a quiet man named Marcus behind the wheel, broad-shouldered and unfailingly polite, who walked her from her door to her car without ever making the gesture feel like a cage. He waited in the small parking structure beneath her office building each evening, reading paperback westerns with cracked spines, while he waited for her shift to end, and within a week, Claire found herself almost fond of him, the way you grow fond of furniture that turns out to be load-bearing. She hated needing it, she said so, more than once, usually late at night on the phone with Gabriel, her frustration spilling out in short, sharp sentences about the life she had built being quietly rearranged around a threat she had not chosen. Gabriel listened every time, did not argue the point, simply absorbed her anger the way a person absorbs weather, present and unbothered, and unwilling to leave just because the air had turned cold. One evening, waiting for the elevator with Marcus after a particularly long day of manuscript deadlines, Claire asked him, half joking, whether he had ever actually had to use the particular skills his job description implied. Once or twice, Marcus said, in the same mild tone he used to discuss weather. Mostly the job is patience, sitting in cars, reading paperbacks. People imagine it's all tension, but 90% of keeping someone safe is just being there before anything happens, so nothing has the chance to. That sounds lonely. It can be. Mr. Lane pays well enough that loneliness comes with decent health coverage. A small, dry smile crossed his face, the kind that suggested more affection for his employer than the deadpan delivery let on. He's not an easy man to read, but he's a good one to work for. Worth knowing, given how much of my week I currently spend reading paperbacks outside your apartment. Claire found herself laughing at that. A real laugh, the first easy one in days, and the elevator doors opened on the sound of it, like the building itself approved. It was a small exchange, nothing dramatic, the sort of moment that would not make it into any story told later about danger and rescue, but it settled something in her all the same. The slow accumulation of evidence that the people Gabriel had placed around her were not merely instruments of his world, but something closer to a found family, extending its careful reach toward her, one paperback western, and one dry joke at a time. It was on a Thursday evening, 11 days after Nathan's call, that the careful new normal nearly broke apart entirely. Claire had stayed late at the office finishing edits on a manuscript with a deadline that refused to move, and by the time she packed up her bag, the building had emptied out around her, fluorescent lights humming over empty desks. She took the elevator down to the parking structure, expecting to see Marcus's familiar shape behind the wheel of his car near the entrance, and instead found the space where he usually parked sitting empty, the structure unusually dim, half its overhead lights either burned out or never switched on. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, held up, 10 minutes out, stay near the elevator. Claire's pulse ticked up a notch, though she told herself it was nothing, a simple delay, the kind of thing that happened to anyone running errands in city traffic. She turned back toward the elevator bank, intending to wait inside the lobby instead of the open structure, and that was when she heard footsteps behind her, unhurried, deliberate, matching her pace exactly when she sped up, and slowing exactly when she did not. She did not turn around. She fixed her eyes on the elevator doors 30 feet ahead, and walked faster, her keys gripped between her fingers the way every safety class she had ever half listened to had taught her, a small, useless weapon against whatever was closing the distance behind her. Claire Hartley, a man's voice, unfamiliar, almost pleasant in its calm. We should talk, about a mutual friend. She broke into a run. The elevator doors were closer now, 15 feet, 10, and behind her, the footsteps had abandoned their pretense of patience, breaking into a pursuit that echoed hard off the concrete walls. Claire's keys cut into her palm, her bag slid off her shoulder, and she did not stop to catch it, letting it fall, focused entirely on the small rectangle of light where the elevator doors stood open, waiting. A car screeched into the structure from the entrance ramp, headlights flooding the dim space, and Marcus was out of the driver's seat before it had fully stopped moving, crossing the distance between his car and Claire faster than she would have believed a man his size could move. Whatever happened behind her in those next few seconds, she did not see clearly, focused instead on Marcus's hand closing around her arm and pulling her firmly toward his car, his body angled between her and whoever had been chasing her, a wall placed exactly where a wall was needed. By the time she dared to look back, the parking structure stood empty behind them, the stranger gone, swallowed back into whatever shadow had produced him, leaving only her dropped bag abandoned on the concrete and her own ragged breathing filling the silence. "You're safe," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, retrieving her bag before he guided her into the car. "You're safe, Miss Hartley. I need you to breathe for me." She did not remember much of the drive that followed, only the streetlights sliding past the window in long orange streaks, her hands pressed flat against her knees to keep them from shaking, the strange comfort of Marcus's paperback western sitting forgotten on the passenger seat beside her, like proof that 10 minutes ago, the world had still been ordinary. Gabriel was waiting at the entrance of his building when they arrived, and the moment Claire stepped out of the car, he crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and pulled her against him with a force that spoke louder than any words could have. She felt his heartbeat hammering through his shirt, fast and uneven, nothing like the controlled stillness she had grown used to. "I'm okay," she said into his shoulder, though her voice shook on the second word. "I'm okay, Gabriel." "You are not okay. You're shaking." He pulled back just enough to study her face, his hands framing it with a gentleness that contradicted the tightness in his jaw. "I should have had 2 cars on you. I should have never let Marcus run a single route alone tonight. This is on me. It's not your fault Dre's people decided to test the perimeter. It is exactly my fault. Everything that happens to you because of who I am is exactly my fault." His thumb traced along her cheekbone, an absent, helpless gesture, the kind a person makes when their hands need something to do besides shake. "I keep telling myself I can protect you from a distance, keep my world and your world in separate rooms. Tonight proved I can't. Not really. Not while Dre still thinks you're a door he can walk through to reach me. So what happens now?" Gabriel's expression shifted into something Claire had not seen from him before, a hard, final resolve that settled over his features like a decision already made, and simply waiting to be spoken aloud. "Now I end this properly. Not through Marcus watching a parking structure, not through careful distance. I go to Dre directly, and I make sure he understands exactly what happens to a man who sends someone after the person I love." The word landed between them before either of them seemed fully ready for it, hanging in the cold night air outside his building, too large to take back and too true to regret. Claire's breath caught. "You love me. I have for longer than I've been willing to admit out loud." A faint, tired smile crossed his face, the first softness since she had stepped out of Marcus's car. "Bad timing for the confession, I'm aware. Gabriel, what does ending this properly actually mean? I need you to tell me you're not about to do something that gets you hurt. I need you to trust me on this one thing. even without every detail. He pressed a kiss to her forehead, lingering there a moment longer than the gesture strictly required, like he was committing the shape of her to memory before he turned to leave. Stay here tonight. The house is secure. Marcus and 2 others will be with you the entire time. I'll be back before morning. Gabriel. Before morning, he said again, quieter this time, almost a promise to himself as much as to her. I need you to let me do this my way. Just once. Please. She did not have an answer that would change his mind, and some small, frightened part of her recognized that she did not actually want to change it, that the alternative, Dre's men closing distance behind her in dim parking structures indefinitely, frightened her more than whatever Gabriel intended to do tonight. She nodded once, swallowing the protest rising in her throat, and let him press one more kiss to her temple before he turned and walked toward the black car already idling at the curb, Marcus falling into step a pace behind him. Claire stood on the steps of his building long after the car had pulled away, watching its taillights shrink into the dark, and felt the cold settle into her chest in a way that had nothing to do with the night air. She went inside only when the silence outside became too heavy to stand in alone. The house was too large and too quiet, and Claire understood within the first hour exactly what Gabriel had meant weeks ago about growing up somewhere loud, about silence making a person feel like they were missing something. She sat in a living room with ceilings too high for the single lamp she had switched on, a mug of tea cooling untouched on the table beside her, and counted the seconds between each tick of a clock she could not locate the source of. Marcus stationed himself near the front entrance without making a show of it, present but unobtrusive, his paperback Western abandoned somewhere in his coat pocket in favor of a stillness that mirrored Gabriel's own. A second man Claire had not met before stood near the back of the house, introduced only as Ellis, nodding once when Gabriel had made the introduction, and saying nothing since. You don't have to sit up with me, Claire told Marcus around midnight, her voice rough from disuse. I'm not going anywhere. Wouldn't dream of leaving you alone tonight, Miss Hartley, not while there's a paperback in my pocket and coffee in the kitchen. He offered a small, steady smile, the kind meant to anchor rather than reassure, and Claire found herself grateful for it, in a way she did not have words for. She fixed her attention on small things to keep the larger fear at bay. The pattern of the rug beneath her feet, an intricate weave of deep blue and faded gold that looked older than the house itself. The framed photograph on the mantel of a woman with Gabriel's same steady eyes, who she guessed was his sister, caught mid-laugh at some celebration Claire would never know the details of. The chip in the rim of her mug, small and easy to trace with her thumbnail, a tiny imperfection that gave her hands something honest to do while her mind refused to settle. She thought about calling Lily, decided against it, not wanting to explain a night she did not yet have words for. She thought about her father, the particular silence of a house waiting for news that might not come, the long-ago version of herself who used to sit on the staircase landing listening for a car in the driveway, never certain whether its return would mean relief or something worse. She had promised herself, at 16, that she would never again build her life around waiting for a man to come home safely from something dangerous. And here she was anyway, 12 years later, doing exactly that, except this time she had chosen it, walked into it with her eyes fully open, and the difference, she realized somewhere around 2 in the morning, mattered more than she expected it to. Her father had never given her a choice in his danger. Gabriel had given her nothing but choices, every step of the way, even when the easier thing would have been to keep her in the dark a while longer. Around 2 in the morning, Ellis appeared briefly in the doorway, murmured something to Marcus, too low for Claire to catch, and disappeared again before she could ask. The exchange lasted only seconds, but it was long enough to send her pulse climbing, and she found herself standing without deciding to, crossing to the window to look out at a driveway that held nothing but shadows and the pale wash of a security light. Was that about him? She asked, not turning around. Is something wrong? Just a check-in, Miss Hartley. Marcus's voice stayed level, practiced, the tone of a man who had learned exactly how much reassurance a frightened person could actually absorb without it ringing hollow. Mr. Lane is fine. These things move slower than they do in the stories people tell about them. Slow is usually good. Slow means nobody's improvising. She nodded, though the explanation did little to loosen the knot lodged beneath her ribs, and returned to her seat by the lamp, drawing her knees up and wrapping her arms around them in a posture she had not folded herself into since childhood. since nights spent on a staircase landing listening for a car that might or might not bring relief. The clock she still could not locate ticked on, indifferent, and somewhere past 2:30, she must have drifted into something like sleep, because the next thing she registered clearly was the buzz of her phone jolting her upright, heart hammering before her mind had even caught up to the sound. At 3:15, her phone buzzed against the table, and she lunged for it so fast she nearly knocked over her cold tea. A text from Gabriel, 3 words long. On my way. Claire read it 4 times before the meaning fully settled, then looked up to find Marcus already watching her, something like relief easing the tension from his shoulders before she had even said a word. He's coming home, she said, and the word home came out of her unplanned, unrehearsed, and surprisingly natural for a house she had only ever visited under circumstances this strange. Then I expect he's earned a very large breakfast, Marcus said, and the small attempt at lightness was enough to break something tight in Claire's chest, a held breath she had not realized she was still holding. The black car pulled into the drive 18 minutes later, and Claire was at the door before it had fully stopped, watching Gabriel step out into the gray edge of early morning light. He looked tired, in a way she had not seen on him before, his jacket discarded somewhere, sleeves rolled to his elbows, a faint bruise darkening along his jaw that he made no effort to hide or explain. But he was upright. He was walking toward her with the same unhurried, certain stride she remembered from the engagement party, and his eyes found hers across the distance with an intensity that erased every careful question she had planned to ask. She did not ask them. She crossed the drive instead, and wrapped her arms around him hard enough that he made a small, surprised sound against her hair, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all, simply standing together in the thin gray light, while the night finally, fully released its grip. Is it over? She finally asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. It's over. He pulled back enough to look at her properly, and whatever had happened in the hours since he left her on the front steps, it had clearly cost him something, though his eyes held a steadiness that told her the cost had been worth paying. Dre understands now that you're not a door. He won't come near you again. Neither will anyone working for him. And Nathan. Something complicated crossed Gabriel's face, equal parts contempt, and something almost like pity. His debt is settled. Cleared, in full, by me, which means he now owes a different kind of debt, one he'll spend a long time working off in ways that don't involve you. He's leaving the city. Tonight, actually, on my recommendation, which he was wise enough to accept without argument. You didn't? Claire stopped, unsure how to finish the question, unsure if she wanted the answer badly enough to ask it outright. Nobody was hurt beyond what they brought on themselves, Gabriel said quietly, reading the unfinished question in her face. I told you once I wasn't going to pretend my world was clean. I won't start pretending now. But I also won't make you carry details that aren't yours to carry. What matters is that it's finished. You're safe. That parking structure, that phone call, all of it, finished. Claire studied his face for a long moment, the tired eyes, the darkening bruise, the steadiness underneath both, that had not wavered once through the entire conversation, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she believed him completely, not because she had stopped being afraid of what he was capable of, but because she had finally let herself separate that capability from the way he had spent every single day since the engagement party, choosing gentleness with her, specifically, deliberately, in a world that had clearly taught him gentleness was optional. Come inside, she said. Marcus promised you a very large breakfast. Did he? His exact words. I'm choosing to hold him to it. The kitchen, when they reached it, was warm and bright, in a way the rest of the house had not managed to be during the long hours of waiting, sunlight beginning to creep through the windows as the gray morning gave way to something gentler. Marcus busied himself at the stove with the easy competence of a man who clearly cooked more than his job description required, and Ellis appeared long enough to report something quietly to Gabriel before disappearing again, leaving the kitchen to settle into something almost ordinary. Claire sat at the counter and watched Gabriel roll his sleeves further up his forearms, watched the tension finally start to drain from his shoulders now that the night's business had been concluded, and felt something settle in her own chest that she had not expected to feel so soon after everything that had happened. Not relief exactly, something steadier than relief, something closer to certainty. You said something last night, she said, once Marcus had set plates in front of them and retreated to give them a measure of privacy. Outside your building, Before you left. Gabriel's hands stilled around his coffee cup. I remember. Did you mean it? Or was it adrenaline talking? I meant every word of it. He set the cup down and met her eyes directly. None of the careful doors he had once warned her about. Nothing held back. I've spent my whole life keeping people at a careful distance, Claire, because distance is safer, for them and for me. And then you grabbed my hand at a party and asked me to pretend. And somewhere in the middle of pretending, I stopped being able to remember why distance had ever felt like the smarter choice. Claire reached across the counter and took his hand, the same hand she had grabbed without permission weeks ago in a room full of strangers, except this time, the gesture asked for nothing pretend about it at all. I spent my whole life learning that men who carry this much danger around with them are the ones you run from. My father taught me that lesson without ever meaning to. And then you walked me to my car in an empty parking lot and made the danger feel like the safest place I'd stood in years. That's either the nicest or the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me. Both, probably. He turned his hand over beneath hers, lacing their fingers together properly, and Claire felt the last of the night's fear finally loosen its hold on her chest entirely, replaced by something warmer, something that felt less like an ending, and more like the actual beginning of whatever this was meant to become. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon that bore no resemblance to the frightened nights that had come before it, Claire stood in her kitchen unpacking groceries while Gabriel argued with her radio about a jazz station that kept cutting to static every time a truck passed outside. He had stopped by, as had become his habit most weekends, carrying a bag of the kind of obscure cheese he insisted she needed to try, and a stack of records he wanted to play on a turntable she had bought, specifically because he had mentioned, once, that he missed the sound of vinyl. Lily had stopped asking careful, worried questions about Claire's mystery man weeks ago, replaced instead by a running commentary on how disgustingly happy Claire looked most mornings, a complaint she delivered with the particular fondness of someone genuinely pleased for her friend, even while pretending to be annoyed by it. Marcus still drove Claire to and from work most days, though the arrangement had softened from necessity into something closer to friendship. His paperback westerns now traded back and forth between them with actual recommendations attached. Nathan, as far as anyone could determine, had not returned to the city. A single postcard had arrived at Claire's apartment 2 weeks after that long, frightening night. No return address. Just a handful of words in handwriting she recognized immediately. Made it somewhere new. Sorry for everything. Hope you're happy. She had not replied, and did not intend to, but she had kept the postcard in a drawer rather than throwing it away. A small, quiet acknowledgement that some chapters simply closed rather than resolved. You're thinking too hard about something, Gabriel said, abandoning his battle with the radio to lean against the counter beside her, watching her fold an empty grocery bag with more attention than the task required. I was thinking about the card, she said, the one you gave me outside the venue, the night we met. I still have it. It's in the same drawer as Nathan's postcard, which feels like it should mean something, the two of them sitting next to each other like that. Should I be concerned my contact information is filed next to your ex's farewell note? You should be flattered. It's a very exclusive drawer. She set the folded bag aside and turned to face him properly, leaning back against the counter, struck again by how easily this had all become normal, the kind of normal she had not let herself imagine possible during those first frightened weeks of half-truths and careful doors. I keep thinking about how it started, a stranger at a party, a favor I had no right to ask of you. Best favor anyone's ever asked of me. You didn't even hesitate, you just took my hand. You looked like you needed someone to take it. He reached for her hand now, unhurried, certain. The same gesture repeated across weeks that had changed everything underneath it, worked out reasonably well, all things considered. Claire laughed, the sound easy and unguarded in a way it had not been in the early weeks of frightened watching and careful waiting, and let him pull her into the kind of embrace that no longer needed an audience to convince, no longer needed an ex-boyfriend's frightened retreat to justify itself. Outside, the city moved on the way it always had, indifferent to the small private revolution that had taken place inside one ordinary kitchen, two people who had started as a stranger's borrowed favor and become, somewhere in the unhurried accumulation of careful truths and harder nights, each other's safest place to stand. The radio finally found its station, jazz crackling warm and low through the apartment, and Claire decided, standing there in the late afternoon light with her hand in his, that some stories did not need a dramatic final scene to prove they had ended well. Some of them simply needed an ordinary Saturday, a stubborn radio, and a man who had once been a stranger, choosing, every day since, to stay.